So good evening, everyone. I welcome you all on Saturday evening for virtual meet or kidney and urinary bladder cancer. First of all, I thanks to entire team of BMS for helping in arranging this webinar. Today, the agenda for today's webinar, we have a two lecture. The first would be on the combination of IO as a first line and metastatic RCC. And the second would be all the options of first-line treatment in the metastatic renal cell carcinoma in year 2021 was going to deliver by Dr. Bharat Baswani. And after that, we have a very interesting two-panel discussion. The first panel would be on urothelial carcinoma. It's going to be moderated by none other than Dr. Sanjay Adla. And after that, we have a second panel discussion on metastatic renal cell carcinoma, and which is going to be moderated by Dr. Mansi Khanderia. She's a senior medical oncologist practicing at Bangalore. So with this, let me start with our first talk. Ravin, can I share my screen? Yeah, thank you. I hope my screens are visible now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So we all know there's a lot of development in the renal cell carcinoma in last 2-3 years. We know the renal cell carcinoma is usually a refractory disease, and especially in metastatic disease, we know the chemotherapy is not very effective in renal cell carcinoma. And last 2-3 years, various newer agents are developed, especially the oral tyrosine kinase inhibitor, as well as the combination of TKI, as well as the immuno-oncology agents has changed the treatment of metastatic renal cell carcinoma. And now we have a combination of two IOs. So we'll start with our first talk would be an improving survival and quality of life in frontline advanced renal cell carcinoma with CTLA-4 and PD-L1 inhibition. Now this is my presentation overview. So we all know renal cell carcinoma is one of the most commonest kidney cancer. Approximately 90% of the cancers of kidney is actually renal cell carcinoma, and they typically arise from the lining of the renal tubules. And they are especially two histopathological subtypes. One is the clear cell versus non-clear cells. And out of clear cell, they arise from the proximal nephrons. And the remaining, the cancers are the non-clear cells, RCC, which are papillary, chromophobe, and collecting ducts. And they actually arise from the distal nephrons. So besides renal cell carcinoma, the other kidney tumors are less than 10%. It could be a transitional carcinoma, Wills tumor, and renal sarcomas. As for the staging of renal cell cancer is concerned, the tumor up to the 7 centimeter is T1, while the tumor is more than 7 centimeters is T2, and the tumor spread beyond the kidney, either into the major veins or perinephric tissue is T4, while that invade beyond the aggregatofascia is T4. And up to stage 1 and stage 2, the disease is limited to the kidney, while in stage 3, the disease either goes to the perinephric tissue or major vein, or there is a nodal spread. And stage 4 is basically the involvement of the distance organ. As far as the outcome of metastatic renal cell carcinoma is concerned, 30% of the patient actually made a diagnosis at metastasis at the beginning, and the 1-year survival rate with current modality was around 36% at 1 year, and the 2-year survival is 22%, and the 5-year survival is 12%. Approximately 40% patients of the renal cell carcinoma die of metastasis. As far as the tumor burden, as far as epidemiology is concerned, and the burden of renal cancer in India, approximately 15,500 cases are diagnosed per year, and around 10,000 deaths with the renal cell carcinoma, and 5-year prevalence is around 31,500. The first study which I'm going to quote here is the CheckMate 025 study, which is a phase 3 randomized open-label trial of nivolumab versus everolimus in a patient of advanced and metastatic clear cell RCC who has initially received a prior anti-angiogenic therapy. And these are the inclusion criteria for the study. So here the nivolumab has been given as a second line compared with the everolimus. And these are the inclusion criteria like this advanced or metastatic renal cell carcinoma, which is clear cell. The patient should receive at least 1 or 2 prior anti-angiogenic therapy for advanced or metastatic setting. The patient have a good performance, no CNS metastasis, the patient should not receive any prior MTOR, and the patient should not receive high dose of glucocorticoids. The randomization done is to 1:1. And the nivolumab is given 3 milligram per kg body weight every 2 weeks, where the everolimus was given 10 milligram daily. And the treatment was continued till disease progression on acceptable toxicity. And if you see the overall survival of nivolumab compared with the everolimus as a second line setting post antigenic inhibitor, the nivolumab is showing a 27% risk in reduction of death compared to the everolimus. So the median OS is 25.8 months versus 19.7 months, and HR is 0.73. So at 5 years, 26% of the patients are alive in nivolumab versus 18% in everolimus. So it's clearly showing a benefit of OS in IOR. So there is need of new agents, and renal cell carcinoma. We know the treatment of with available options. The majority of the patients die with the metastasis, and if even in the treatment naive setting, the median OS approximately ranges from 11 months to 48 months. Even the patients previously received any treatment, the median is 12 months to around 25 months. So despite with all the options, we are expecting a newer treatment options for better survival, quality of life, and the patient can achieve the complete response, and especially the durable response should be received. So that's why there is a need of the newer combination and newer agents. Rationale for use of IOs in renal cell carcinoma. We all know renal cell carcinoma is actually immunogenic tumors. There's various immune cell types in RCC that includes the increased level of regulatory T cells, CD45 memory T cells, CD8 T cells, and CD4 T cells. We all know even in renal cell cancer compared to the rest of the cancer, there are some spontaneous regression of the disease, spontaneous remission. These are the tumor where we can see the immune cells infiltrate with the several immune escape mechanism, and histologically they respond with the various immune agents like interleukin, interferon, and they responded with the immune oncology drugs. As far as the renal cell carcinoma tumor microenvironment is concerned, the tumor cells approximately 24% of the patients having expression of the PD-L1, and this PD-L1 expression is correlated with the cancer-specific death. While in tumor-infiltrating lymphocyte, they showed approximately 50% or more patients have showing this PD-L1 expression, and their high expression is associated with the poor outcome in a patient of renal cell carcinoma. As far as the combination of two IOs concerned, we know the combination has a different mechanism. So nivolumab, which is an anti-PD-1 inhibitor, they restore the T cell function, they express the pre-existing T cell response, they increase the cytokine production, and while the ipilimumab, which is anti-CTLA4, that induce the de novo anti-tumor T cell response, then enable the adaptation of the evolving tumor. They promote the emergence of memory T cells, and they cause compensating increase in the tumor PD-L1. If you see the combination, the periphery, they block the CTL pathway, and while in the tumor microenvironment, the PD-1 pathway is blocked by nivolumab, and where there is more activation of the T cell, which fights against the renal cancer cells. As far as the risk criteria is concerned, the IMDC, which is International Metastatic RCC Database Consortium, the score, which is a hinge criteria. So there is the two criteria based on the clinical and laboratory criteria. The clinical criteria, performance status or the diagnosis of metastasis from the initial, if the metastasis is less than a year, that is the one criteria, and the laboratory criteria is hemoglobin level, calcium, neutrophil, and platelet counts. If the patient having none of the scores are there, they are in the favorable risk. If 1 to 2 scores are there, it's intermediate risk, or 3 or more scores are the poor risk. If we see the outcome in this risk stratification, the favorable risk patient is the median OS around 44 months, while in the poor risk, it's around 8 months. So as far as the risk is high, the outcome is less, and with the available treatment option. Coming to the landmark trial, CheckMate 214 study, which is a combination of nivolumab plus ipilimumab in the phase 3, head-to-head compared with the sunitinib in the treatment clear cell metastatic RCC patient. And these are the patients having the good performance. They are previously untreated patient with the total populations around 1,096 patients. They have randomized as 1:1 based on the IMDC prognostic score and the region. And the patient has received a combination of nivolumab and ipilimumab, but initially the nivolumab was given 3 weekly, followed by the maintenance nivolumab as 2 weekly till the disease progression or unacceptable toxicity, but compared with the sunitinib 50 milligram OD 4 week on 2 week off. And this treatment is being continued till the disease progression or toxicity. So this slide shows the treatment schedule, where initially the nivolumab was given 3 milligram per kg body weight, and the ipilimumab was given 1 milligram per kg body weight for 4 doses. And this schedule was given every 3 weekly. And after the 4 cycles of combination, the maintenance treatment arms consists of nivolumab single agent 3 milligram per kg every 2 weeks, while sunitinib is given the schedule of 4 week on 2 week off. And whenever this combination has been given, I think this is just given a 30-minute infusion. The nivolumab should be given prior to the ipilimumab, And after 4 doses of combination, the schedule was for nivolumab was 2 weekly, and no pre-medication is required. Coming to the overall survival with this combination, the nivolumab showed a long-term durable survival in metastatic RCC. The median OS is 47 months compared to the 26.6 months with sunitinib, and the HR is 0.66. At 42 months, 52% patients are alive in intermediate and poor risk category compared to the sunitinib, it is 39%. So 1 out of 2 patients are still alive with this combination at 42 months. As far as the complete response is concerned, the combination IOI had a better durable response as well as complete response. Around 10.1% patient having the complete response compared to the 1.4% with the sunitinib arm. And out of complete responder, 84% of patients are actually maintain their response at 42 months. As far as the response is concerned, there is a better overall response rate in intermediate and poor risk compared to sunitinib favors the combination of IOs, and even in intent to treat population, this combination is superior. While there's more CR in even in the favorable risk category, though there is more response for sunitinib in favorable risk category of the patient. The time to response is faster for IOS combination is 2.8 months compared to the 3.6 months with sunitinib, and there is a more durable response with the IOI combination. The median duration of response not reached, while it's 19.7 months for the sunitinib. At 42 months, the PFS is superior with the IOI combination. At 42 months, 35% patients are progression-free compared to the 19% in patient of sunitinib. So it favors of the combinations. While the durable of response of concern in a post-op analysis, the combination of nivolumab, there's more patients are have a complete response, and even on those are the responder. Out of those 34% are still on treatment, 47% even after they are off treatment, they have not received any subsequent treatment, and 19% patients receive the subsequent treatment. And even in the post-hoc analysis, those patients who discontinue with the study treatment in the IMDC intermediate and poor risk category, they are high proportion of the patient, they did not receive any subsequent treatment compared to the sunitinib arm, where 25% patients actually they have not received any subsequent treatment, while in the combination of IO arm, 38.2% patient actually they have not received any subsequent treatment. Treatment-free survival is superior at 30 months. 36% of the patients have nivo plus EP is have a treatment-free compared to the 16% sunitinib. And as far as the safety is concerned, numerically there is a more toxicity of sunitinib arm compared to the IO combination. More diarrhea, more fatigue, and more nausea and vomiting, stomatitis with the sunitinib. The combination of nivolumab is less toxic compared to the sunitinib, though there are more immune-related side effects with this combination, and especially with ipilimumab, there is more skin toxicity, especially the rash and pruritus is concerned. But the grade 3-4 toxicity over the time are less, and that basically mainly occurs in first 4 doses where the ipilimumab is combined with the nivolumab. And as far as the treatment-related adverse event is concerned, there are more immune toxicity in the combination of IOIs, and where the more endocrine dysfunction, hepatitis or diarrhea is there. But if we see the grade 3-4 toxicity are much less compared to the sunitinib. So majority of this immune-mediated toxicity usually occur in the first 4 doses of nivolumab, where which are resolved with established strategy, and after that the maintenance arm is actually very easily safely tolerated. So with this combination, the grade 3-4 toxicity is 47%, while in sunitinib is 64%, and the discontinuation rate are also less, and around 80% patients have completed the 4 doses of ipilimumab. Even in those patients where they have been discontinued of IO, they are not deteriorating overall survival. Around 66% patients are having at a 42 months have been the median OS compared to the 56% in intent to treat population. So those patients, even the discontinued related toxicity, are still doing good. And as far as the early and sustained improvement of the health-related quality of life is concerned, that favors a combination of nivolumab over the sunitinib arm. So 2 years better. So with this combination, this is the first IO-based combination which showed a durable and a long-term OS benefit with less toxicity. and they have around 52% of the 42-month OS compared to the 39% sunitinib. More complete CR is 10.1 versus 1.4% in sunitinib, and nearly at 4 years, 84% of the complete responders are ongoing with the combination. And as far as the safety profile is concerned, there is a less grade 3/4 toxicity with IOI combination, 47% with nivolumab compared to the 64% in the sunitinib. So with this data, this combination is approved as a category 1 preferred options for intermediate and poor risk advanced clear cell renal cell carcinoma. And I hope Bharat is going to discuss all other options in the first-line treatment in year 2021. So to conclude, nivolumab offers the long-term survival benefit with a fewer grade 3/4 toxicity than TKI alone. Nivolumab plus ipilimumab is the first IO-based combination to demonstrate long-term superior overall survival versus the sunitinib. 1 out of 2 patients are still alive with this combination at minimum 42 months of follow-up analysis. The response of this combination is fast and durable, and 10.1% patient having the complete response. They maintain 84% the patient maintain the response at 4 years. And the optimum dosing of the nivolumab in RCC offers a manageable safety profile. And this combination has been showing a sustained improvement in the health-related quality of life criteria. So I thanks for warm listening. I hope we'll take the question, our second talk, which is going to deliver by Dr. Bharat Baswani. So now I invite Dr. Bharat to deliver his talk on the frontline management of metastatic RCC in year 2021. So over to you, Bharat.
Good evening, friends. Let me thank Ashish sir, Viraj, my younger brother, for the kind invitation. Give me 1 minute. Most important, are my slides visible, sir? Am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Look, let me be very truthful first. When I was supposed to talk on, we had supposed to be a debate where I had to speak about immunotherapy as a first line in metastatic RCC. But somehow, because of some unforeseen circumstances, it got changed. Yesterday, I got a call that let me speak about first line therapy in metastatic RCC.
So the reason is this probably because in year 2021, the combination is
yes, agreed. That is why, that is the best part of it.
That's the reason where the single agent TKI is very limited, or unless until there is a financial constraint.
Absolutely agreed, sir. So the heart of my presentation was like a debate, but you will definitely enjoy. However, I am presenting, probably it has never been presented because I have tried to compare the 7 parameters, what I call as Satya pe Satta. So you will enjoy the next 15-20 minutes of my presentation. So the topic is, on a Monday morning, if I have a patient with metastatic RCC, being a favorable risk, intermediate risk, high risk, why should I use immunotherapy or immunotherapy-based combination? That is the gist of my presentation. Now, when we talk about treatment of RCC as a whole, we divide our treatment into 3 eras. Era of interleukin, era of targeted therapy, and now the era of immunotherapy. When I started my DM in 2006, where sir already got passed and sir was just passed out, their only drug that was available at that time was a high dose interleukins. 7.5 lakh unit per kg, 3 times a day for 5 days. Never used in my lifetime, but what literature we had it, there were deeper responses, but around 5 to 10% of the patient only. Then in 2005 came the first targeted therapy for RCC, which was a target study comparing with placebo sorafenib. A minimal 10% response with a PFS of close to 5.5 to 6 months. Then came the landmark study, which will still quote as a first line in majority of the trial by Motzer et al. Comparing sunitinib with interferons. That study for the first time showed that targeted therapy, that is VEGF inhibitor sunitinib, has a better response rate, a far better PFS. Unfortunately, the overall survival was not statistically significant, but it was 26 months, which was the highest in the RCC setting. Then came temsirolimus study, ARCC study, which was only in poor risk study. That study also showed that in a poor risk, the best drug should be temsirolimus, which was a 25 mg per kg. Then came bevacizumab study, Avoran study, if you remember. That study also shows a statistically significant improvement in PFS. And then came the second major study called as pazopanib by Stenberg et al. over a period of like 7 to 10 years, we used to discuss, is sunitinib better, is pazopanib better? So you had two studies, COMPARE study and PICE study. What these studies showed was both were more or less equivalent, but pazopanib had better quality of life or lesser side effects. And then came the era of what we call as a immunotherapy. So from the second line study of nivolumab 225, we had the first targeted combination, what Dr. Ashish sir very elaborately discussed, CheckMate 214. Now, over the last 3 years, there are 3 new combinations. If you remember, ESCO 2020, you had a 24 months data of Pembro XZ. Then in this ESMO 2020, you had the first data of nivolumab plus cabozantinib. And in this ESCO GU 2021, you have the data of CLEAR study, which is pembrolizumab and lenvatinib. So less than 2 years, you have crowding of drugs in RCC. And again, there is a lot of confusion to say which is the best thing. So I'll be comparing, basically the comparison is with sunitinib, but I'll be telling you the silent point on a Monday morning where I should choose the IO or where I should choose the IO-TKI. Now, $1 million question to everyone. Again, the same thing. Which should be the ideal first line in the metastatic RCC? Either it should be TKI, which we know it is not there, or an immunotherapy combination. So when I was preparing for it, this was the thing that I thought. I'll go back, sorry. In 2021, if I make a Bollywood movie, which will be the most bankable star in 2021? I don't think so I need to answer, although I'm a very big Govinda fan. But still, at this moment, if I have to make, it should be a Salman Khan only. And that is what, as of today, if you are affordable, you have to start your patient on an immunotherapy-based combination. The real debate should have been, which is the best immunotherapy combination now? Because that is why we will be fighting in the next 2 to 5 years, which will be the best combination. And here we need to discuss, because there are so many things, minor things that you need to know in the study. So this is my Satya Pe Satta slide. On a Monday morning, if I have to choose my first line treatment, what are the 7 parameters which should decide which is the best treatment? Overall response, more importantly, complete response, because the closest you get to cure is a complete response. As we have seen in the IO data, those who have a CR continue to do well, majority around 90% at 4 years. So this is what we call as the tailing of the curve. The duration of response, again a silent point of immunotherapy. 2 most important parameters in any clinical study: progression-free survival, overall survival. Around 15% of RCCs have a sarcomatoid histology. What should be the best drug in sarcomatoid? As all of us know that the survival is less than 1 year when we give our VEGF targeted therapy. Some things that was discussed by Dr. Ashish sir also. A good drug, has it really improved our quality of life? And the last but not the least is, after giving so much, is the toxicity increasing or not? So let me start with the first thing. Before immunotherapy era, there were 4 pivotal studies that I had already discussed. Sunitinib, bevacizumab, pazopanib, and temsirolimus with the standard care of now. What we get from a single agent TKI is a response rate close to 30 to 40%. 47% for me is an outlier. I'll be telling you in the 4 landmark study, the response rate depends upon basically, is it a favorable risk or an intermediate or a poor risk? Because if the patient belongs to good risk or a favorable risk, the responses with TKIs are quite high. But in all, 30 to 40% of the patient will have a PR. Progression-free survival around 9 to 11 months. And overall survival close to 2 years. So this is the basic landmark for a TKI: 30 to 40% responses, 8 to 11 months of a PFS, and around 2 years of OS. Now, how has it been bettered now in a presentation we will be able to tell. This is the most important slide for me for TKI. When should I think of even giving my TKI? So that should be based, that is a very big presentation. If you have time, go to ESCO 2019 by SQ their presentation. If on a day I have only 0 risk factor, so a disease which has relapsed after 1 year, post nephrectomy, no anemia, good performance status, calcium normal, platelets normal, and WBC normal, patient fit, I may think of giving my TKIs or if there is one risk factor positive. Because if you see, the responses are 37 to 50%. Conversely, if I have any 3 to 4 to 6 risk factor positive, I should not think of giving my TKI. So if a patient comes to you on a wheelchair with multiple meds, please don't give your TKI. You are wasting your money. You are wasting patient's money. Plus, patient is so sick that he will not be able to tolerate it also. It is 17 on 15% responses with no CR. Survival less than 6 to 8 months. So for this is something that we should keep on. If the patient with your clinic and a wheelchair, the patient will, 1 in 10 patient will respond to your sunitinib. See your left side where as the risk factors are more, 3 to 4.6, you still have 40 to 45% response. So there you have, whenever you think of TKI plus, do your IMDC at least and see if the risk factors are 3 or more, don't give it. Either you give a support care, I think so that will be better in terms of quality of life. Then came the paradigm shift, and you had pivotal studies which were presented on all the leading journals. And that is what the aim of my presentation is. Now, just look into the baseline data of 4 studies. So what I will be discussing today is Checkmate 214 Nivo plus Ipi versus sunitinib. Then came Keynote 426 Pembro XV versus sunitinib. Checkmate 9ER, which was presented in ESMO last year, cabozantinib plus nivolumab versus sunitinib, and a blockbuster study till now, clear study, Pembro Len versus lenvatinib. Now the differences in the studies are that favorable risk factor, try to look into favorable, that were more in your Keynote studies and clear studies. Now why it is important is because more number of favorable patients will get you a better survival overall also. Second thing was a PD-L1 more than 1%. So although not a biomarker that we use, but in the XV Pembro study, it was high, and probably these patients respond better than a PD-L1 negative. The third thing which determines is a nephrectomy done before. So only in Checkmate 9ER, only 68% of patients had nephrectomy, but otherwise around 80% of them has nephrectomy. The thing is, post-nephrectomy, there is a better responses when given than a de novo metastatic. So these 4 were the subtle changes. So the worst subset were in clear as well as 9ER study. The better population was there in Keynote 426 with more favorable, more PD-L1 and more nephrectomy. So these were the basic difference in the study population. Now the first parameter, number 1, you can just response rate. Just see your sunitinib response rate in the 4th landmark study. Look, nobody has presented. Try to remember when you discuss with your patient. 30 to 40% of the responses with sunitinib in either of the 5 studies done. Now look into your responses with the IO combination. It comes from 42 to 51 to 16 Pembro XV and 71% in Len Pembro. Look, 71% are the responses you think of getting in a lymphoma. And here you have a cancer called as RCC where it is 71%. Now look at the second parameter, CR rate. 16% of the patient had complete response with the Len-Pem combination. 11% with Ipi-Nivo, 8.8% with Pembro XV and Cabo-Nivo 8%. So you are looking at 10 to 15% of the patients which are really cured at this moment to say, or a very long-term survival. Now the third point, clinical benefit rate. 72, 88, 81, 89, 90. So 9 of the 10 patients will either have a stable disease or a partial response or a complete response. Look, this is called as what we say revolution, I can always say. From a 10% response in a sorafenib study to a 90% clinical benefit rate with the latest combination. And that is a wonder part of what we call as IO or IO-based combination. And if you compare with sunitinib in terms of response rate, 30% better response rate with Len-Pem versus a sunitinib as a single agent. Even in other studies also, you have a 20 to 30% overall difference in the response rate. And that is a wonderful part we say about IO or a IO-based combination. The second thing, what is the response and the what we call as the sustained response. Now, if you look into these curves, at the first interim analysis of IO plus TKI, the curves have started separating and they continue to separate. If you see your Checkmate 214, the only criticism is the curves have started to deviate after 6 months. So a fastly growing tumor, a very symptomatic patient, don't think of your IO, but think of your IO TKI combination, because if you see at the first, I'll mark it out. You can see this line. At the first analysis only, there was a separation of the curve. So for a highly symptomatic patient, you should give a TKI plus IO. And for a stable, slow-growing tumor, a young patient, you should think of your IO-IO combination. The third thing, what we call as longevity of response. Now, this was a subset which was taken from Checkmate 214. See your IO-IO tail and see your sunitinib tail. Now, if you look into the PFS in Checkmate 214, it was 12 months. And when you look into 42 months PFS, it was 35%. So only 15% of the patient progress in 30 months. Can you imagine 15 at 12 months, 50% of the patient have progression free. And at 42 months, 35% of the patient were progression free. So in the 30 months after PFS, only 15% of the patients had progressed. And that is what we are trying. We are now getting a long-term survivor, which we equate to cure. So 48 months, still 30% of the patient were progression free with IO-IO. So on a Monday morning, if I have a 32-year-old patient who is very fit and is able to take toxicity, I'll think of a IO-IO combination. If a same 30-year-old has extensive disease like liver, lung, bone mets, I don't think of my IO-IO, but I'll give a IO-TKI because their responses should be faster. And the responses are slower in IO-IO, but are very fast in IO-TKI combination. So the third thing was a long duration of response. Now comes the most important thing, what we discuss with our patient, a PFS and a OS. Let us see the PFS. If you see in all your studies of sunitinib, 12 months, 11 months, 8.3 months. And when you look into the PFS of the 4 landmark study, 16 months, 17.1 months, 12.4 and 23.9. There was a day where 26 months was a survival for sunitinib, and now the progression-free survival is 23.9 months. If you look into the data, the best data is with CLEAR study. But as I will be telling you in the later part, the toxicities are also high with the CLEAR study. But all in all, 16 to 24 months is an average progression-free survival with the IO-based combination. We have not got the OS data in any of the studies till now in an IO plus TKI or IO-IO in an intent to treat population. 47 to 48 months was only in an IO-IO combination in Checkmate 214 was in the intermediate and poorer, but the overall population had not reached. But if you look into your sunitinib data, it is 32.9 months in one of the studies, Checkmate 214. So all in all, what we are expecting is a 5 years intent to treat survival. So 5 years data is something that is a new benchmark for all these studies, and that is what we need to see in the future. In the next 1 year, you will have the complete data. At least for Checkmate 214, you will have a complete data available with you. Fifth thing, what will you give in a sarcomatoid histology? Now here also, if you see the data of the IO combination, 60% responses with Checkmate 214 study. 60% is better than the overall response rate in the study population. And it is as good in other studies. Now, if you see the responses also, 19% complete response and 61% ORR with IO-IO combination in sarcomatoid. Again, the third indication, on a Monday morning, if I have a sarcomatoid RCC, I will not think twice, but give them a combination of IO-IO, that is ipilimumab and nivolumab, because 61% of my patient will have a response, and more importantly, 20%, 1/5 will have a complete response with the combination. If I look into the progression-free survival, more than 2 years, again, 26.5 has never been reached even with a normal histology, let alone a sarcomatoid. And here we are getting an immunotherapy combination, which is giving us a progression-free survival of 26.5 months. Overall survival probably will be around 3 years, as what we can understand for it. But sarcomatoid, IO-IO, other than that, you can give your IO-TKI combination. What about quality of life, the 6th parameter? So 2 trials have already given the IO-T quality of life pair. One is a Checkmate 214 that sir also told, Ipi plus Nivo, versus and Checkmate 9ER, which was a combination of cabozantinib with Nivo. If you see in your data, the curve, the brown curve and second is a blue curve. Both have shown higher scores with the IO-based combination, which indicates that the quality of life was better when we give a IO plus IO or a IO-TKI than a sunitinib. So everywhere you can see it is a better combination and it gives you a better quality, and every parameter is good. The most important thing about toxicity, we always think that giving 2 drugs may have a more toxicity. Let us see you need to see only 2 things when you discuss. What is a grade 3 to 5 toxicity? That is most important, and all cause toxicity. See your Checkmate 214. The grade 3 to 4 toxicity is 47 versus 64% with sunitinib, lesser toxicity. See your Keynote 426. Again, an equivalent toxicity 96%. More importantly, grade 3 to 5 toxicity 66 versus 62%. So again, more or less equal. Check your Checkmate 9ER. 75% versus 71, 61 versus 51. So what we have inferred, and the last study, which I believe is slightly more toxic, is a clear study. The grade 3 toxicities are 71 versus 58% with sunitinib. But this gives you the best result. Now, a basic question to everyone. If you are giving your IO-TKI and if you have a diarrhea, how do you treat it? So the guidelines say that when you have a toxicity due to combination, first stop your TKI. Please resist. First stop your TKI, continue IO. And if the toxicity doesn't go down, then you have to stop your IO. So for a dual agent, the guideline says that IO-TKI, if there is a toxicity that is diarrhea, rash, fatigue, where both can have, first you should stop your TKI. And if still the toxicity continues, then you stop your IO parameter. Now, always a debate or thing comes that in favorable patient, I can use my single agent TKI. But if you look into Keynote 426, twice the complete response. Look, if a young patient comes to me, my first aim is, can I cure it? That is why. So twice the complete response with IO-TKI, 10% better PFS at 2 years with IO-TKI, 3 months better PFS with IO-TKI. So given a chance, and if I have all the resources, I may still think of giving my IO plus TKI even in a favorable risk patient. The second discussion comes, if cost is a constraint. That is what in universal India, that is the main important thing. If I have a patient who don't have money, I may still not think of giving a sunitinib pazopanib. Let me see why. Now, this was the latest study that has presented in the first line clear study. A combination of len-avero versus sunitinib versus len-pembro. Now, everybody concentrate on len-pembro arm. Let you concentrate on len plus everolimus arm. This is something which we are available in India as a generic form. 15 to 20,000 per month is a combination. You have a progression-free survival of 14.7 months. Again, you are reaching as close to your immunotherapy target with len-avero in the first line, which is statistically better, 35% less progression when you give len-avero as a first line. So probably in future, the sunitinib in a good risk may be competing with this combination also in patients who cannot afford. And that is something we may need to discuss in the future also. The NCCN guidelines says the same. In favorable, they have said len-pembro as category 1, others are 2A. And if you look into poor and intermediate, the 3 combination of axi-pembro, nivo-ipi, and len-pembro are given a category 1. They have not given a reason why cabo-nivo has not been given. I tried to find out. Unfortunately, it has still not come. But the 3 other combinations are given category 1. So if I have to summarize, immunotherapy as of today, with its combination with either a IO, that is ipilimumab, or with a TKI, whether it could be lenvatinib, whether it could be cabozantinib, or whether it could be axitinib, is and will be the future of treatment in the first line metastatic RCC. It has a better response rate, 30% better. Complete response rate around 10 to 15%. Duration of response more than 2 years. PFS 16 to 24 months. OS close to 5 years. Sarcomatoid against IO has reached nearly 3 years now. And more importantly, the toxicities which we get are comparable to sunitinib, are manageable, but with more knowledge, I think so, we'll be better equipped to deal with our toxicities related to immunotherapy. I work in Hyderabad and Nagpur, and my presentation will never be complete without our Talaiva, Rajnikant. Probably the closest where you will get immunotherapy will be to Rajnikant. He had the first super hit film of his career in 1975 in his first, and till now also every film of his is super hit. And that is what is immuno-oncology. It started with a bang, and with newer combination in a longer duration, it continues to give you better responses, better PFS, and or overall survival with better quality of life. I thank you all for a patient hearing.
Thank you, Virat. Thank you, Bharat, for a nice sum up of all the options as a first line management of RCC is concerned. I think there's no question in the chat, but just one thing from my side. Like you nicely sum up all the options, you have a very rightly mentioned the cross-trial comparison. The point is here because most of the patient, they have been required a subsequent line of the treatment even after the first line of the progression. The point is here, suppose if you use a combination of IO plus TKI, so how do you choose your subsequent line of treatment? If you're using IO combination, you have probably a TKI or TKI combination in the second line. So the question is, how do you sequence your treatment?
Yeah. Sir, I'll give you three options. Like now I have started with my IO and TKI and I have got a very good response. First scenario. So IO TKI giving you what you say 16 months, 17 months. Then probably the second line option, I'll choose a TKI only. What if I have given my combination of IO or Pembro-Exe? I will choose second line as cabozantinib. And third line I'll give now with the study called as Keynote 146, a combination of Len-Pembro, which was presented in ESCO 2020, which had a third line PFS of 11.2 months. Fourth line, I will keep my combination of everolimus and something else. Now a second scenario. Suppose there is no response to a combination of IO-TKI. Then I'll change the entire parameter and give a mTOR in the second line. So my combination will be probably a everolimus plus a lenvatinib. Now, the thing is, if I use IO as a first line, then I have two options available. I can still give my single agent TKI, or if you see again a Keynote 146 study, those patients who had taken IO and if they have responded, they do very well with lenvatinib and Pembro combination in the second and third lines.
Right, but I think if you use IO combination, you have a better combination. You can use two TKI because
sir, it is there. You can use it in the second line or you can use it in the third line. As long as the patient is fit enough, sir, that we can use both.
The patient can tolerate the Lenva plus everolimus is a very good data in the second.
Sir, actually, my data I had presented in a second line. Len-Evero is not a bad drug, sir. Our everolimus dose is 5 mg. Although we write 18 mg Len, but somehow my experience is that 12 to 14 mg our people tolerate well. We have quite 2 to 3 complete responses on a third line after progression on a IO. So, sir, that combination is also very good. Even in the second line also, if you see, study 218, the data has come about 18 mg Len versus 14 mg Len. That is, if you see the PFS in that data also, in a third line, it is 14 months, sir, PFS. Right. So that combination, unless we try, I think so, that is a good. In fact, I may think of giving a first line also, sir, with the subset of clear study, probably because cost is a constraint. This combination, the better, the most fit person are first line. So probably they may tolerate this drug better in the first line than second line. And you have a 14 months PFS as compared to 9 months with sunitinib. So probably a thing to ponder about, but yes, this is something that we will keep on discussing in the future also.
Okay, thanks. So to sum up, I think if the patient is what you mentioned, if the patient is a very low volume disease and not very symptomatic, IO combination should be the way you should go. If the patient is symptomatic, you can combine with immunotherapy with VEGF TKI as a first line treatment. And with the data of clear cell, which is showing the highest PFS, though the OS data is still yet to mature, but I think this is the highest PFS we have. And there is also a study called Keynote 146, where even the third line pamrevlumab lenvatinib is showing a very good response, around 50% plus 55% overall response. So that can be given. So that you rightly mentioned. Thank you, Dr. Bharat, for the nice presentation. And I think we need to proceed for our next session. That would be a panel discussion on the urothelial carcinoma. And I request Dr. Sanjay Adla, sir, to moderate this session. And sir, your panelists, I am just telling the name of the panelists because some of the panelists is not joined because of the COVID scenario. But I think Dr. Dhruv Mehta, he's a medical oncologist, Dr. Rupesh, and Dr. Swati, and Dr. Kinjal. Right now you have the board, and I think Dr. Bharat or Dr. Mudis, sir, you can be there for this panel if it is required. Thank you.
Dr. Sanjay sir, please unmute, sir.
I have unmuted myself. Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Sir, you have Dr. Kinjal in place of Dr. Rishi Panchal. Dr. Kinjal.
Dr.
Kinjal Jani.
Kinjal Jani instead of Rishi Panchal. Okay. Okay, wherever Dr. Kinjal, Kinjal.
Yes.
Okay. My request for Dr. Kinjal would be wherever you see RP, if you can just answer those questions, I would be grateful. Yes?
Absolutely, sir.
The initials.
Absolutely.
Okay, Kinjal. Jani.
Thank you.
It's a problem having two first names, isn't it? I didn't know whether Kinjal was a first name or a surname. Anyway.
Yeah, it's a first name, but it's a first name for a female and a male also.
Okay, I didn't want to ask that. Thank you very much for clarifying. Okay,
Yeah.
so I have to have a balance between urology, medical oncology, and radiation oncology. And me being a urologist, I have more directed questions towards uro-oncologists. So don't feel bored. I've just tried to cover what you might be interested to know from uro-oncologists as well. So let's start off. The majority of the questions and the answers are based on the EAU 2020 and 2021 guidelines. And I wanted to cover the upper urinary tract, where we have seen quite a bit of a change in the management in the last year, as well as a bit of the bladder. Bladder, I know there are quite a few molecules in the pipeline, but currently they are all in the second or third line. And that's more of a medical oncology discussion rather than a uro-oncology discussion. So I haven't gone into that aspect. Okay, so I wanted to cover both upper urinary tract as well as the lower urinary tract. So let's go down to the basic, the diagnostic pathway. Though we think we know everything in this aspect, still there are some questions that need to be answered. So we'll start off. I'm mainly looking at Dr. Rupesh Shah and Dr. Swati Shah, okay, for the answers on this. A 65-year-old gentleman with history of diabetes and hypertension, investigated for hematuria elsewhere, was found to have a 1.5 centimeter in the mid-ureter on the left side with normal blood test as well as EGFR of 100 ml. My questions are these. Dr. Swati Shah, we'll start off with you, ma'am. Are you there?
Yes. Good evening.
Okay. So everyone will need a rigid cystoscopy. That would be a first line of investigation?
Yes.
Okay. And urine cytology, Dr.
Yes.
Rupesh?
Yes, if already mass is there,
Yeah.
so it is less role, but should be done. Yes.
Okay. You use the word should. Why would you need to do that?
Suppose your biopsy result, it is, sir, it was a sonography. Just I missed the first slide. It was a sonography report.
Just picked up a mass.
Okay, ultrasound. Yes, then I will do a urine cytology. Yeah.
Okay. We'll come back to that one. A CT urogram? Will you do it?
Yes, that has to be an investigation of choice for.
Okay. And Dr. Dhruv, would you do an MR urogram compared to a CT urogram? Which one would you prefer?
CT urogram is preferable, but MR urogram can be done in patients who have poor renal function,
Okay.
and who has iodinate contrast allergy. They can be considered for MR urogram.
Super. And Dr. Panchal is not there, but Kinjal, do you want to take because every radiation oncologist like to do a PET CT on everyone. Would you like to do a
Yeah, so not a PET CT for sure. I might do, if I find a disease on a CT scan or an MRI, I would go for a bone scan to rule out distant mets. Not a PET CT for sure.
bone scan?
Yeah.
That's a bit of a variance. Any guideline or any paper that you can think of? Why would you do a bone scan in a?
So we need to rule out a distant metastasis. So
Yes.
if I have a CT thorax and a CT abdomen, or an MR abdomen and a CT thorax, I can go for a bone scan or a PET CT. Both are fine with me
Right.
to rule out distant mets.
Anybody else who wants to back him?
PET CT is basically does not delineate anatomy of upper urinary tract lesions. So it is category 2B recommendation in NCCN guideline.
Okay.
FTG PET CT.
Usually we consider PET to diagnose recurrence in urological malignancy most of the time. Only for a testicular tumor, PET has initial role most of the time. So PET I usually consider for recurrence.
So just to move it forward, you would do a rigid cystoscopy on everyone just because that would be the primary urological investigation. Urine cytology, though we tend to do it, does it add anything more is always a bit of a question, especially when there is a mass. Let's say if there wasn't a mass and there was a hematuria, then you can say, okay, if it adds, that's one. Second, let's say the histology shows low grade and then the cytology is positive as high grade, probably it might add. Whether I would do it as a baseline when the patient comes in with hematuria, query. CT urogram is our baseline investigation. MR urogram, as Dr. Dhruv has mentioned, would consider in some situation. PET CT as a baseline investigation, I would not do it, and I would park the bone scan for now. Okay, so this is what we have done: a CT urogram and a cytology, and it shows a 2.1 centimeter enhancing lesion in the mid-ureter with periureteric stranding, and there is a renal pelvic filling defect which is 2 centimeters in size. There are no lymph node metastasis, and cytology shows malignant urothelial cells. Cystoscopy is normal. Would you do any more investigations at this stage?
So along with cystoscopy, you must have done ureteroscopy also and biopsy or not?
Okay, I am asking, would you do it?
Yeah, it is already a mass lesion on CT scan. I would do it.
Okay, do you need to do it?
With this CT scan, we can directly proceed for the surgery. Previously, there was a guideline, but now recently, most of the uro-oncologists, they prefer to tend to do it probably, maybe for legal consequences or don't know.
Okay, Dr. Swati, would you like to add anything more to that?
There are data coming up for neoadjuvant in high-grade T2 lesions for these ureteric masses also. So sometimes we might consider, because it is showing periureteric standing, so the patient might have T2 disease as per the CT report. So I would like to do URS and biopsy. And also as per the medical legal aspect, it is better to have a biopsy report pre-hand before going ahead.
Okay, so you raised two questions. One was the high grade, then the second one was the medical legal aspect. For the medical legal aspect, we take three things into consideration. Radiologically, is this tumor or not? Urine cytology shows malignant, not abnormal, malignant cells. So you have got 2 out of the 3. The third one would be a biopsy. If we have 2 out of the 3, I think we can go ahead with the primary treatment, but it would be safer if it was anything like there are 2 filling defects and then nothing else can cause filling defect with enhancement. Yes. And the high grade one, that's a bit of a, if it shows high grade, okay, I'll just say if the biopsy shows high grade, you're fine. If the biopsy shows low grade, do you trust it?
No. And what about hydronephrosis? You didn't mention in CT scan.
Mild
it's a mild
creatinine is still 100. Creatinine clearance is still 100. So mild dilatation, it's not completely blocked.
Okay.
Okay. So the biopsy can be considered, but not always necessary. Retrograde pyelogram, if the CT wasn't done, then you might consider doing a retrograde pyelogram. So I would not do a retrograde pyelogram in the presence of a CT. And I would always like to get a CT scan before you do a cystoscopy, so that you know whether you want to do a URS and biopsy or not. Okay, so let's see whether we have done all the things as advised by the guidelines, which is perform cystourethropy for doing the bladder tumor, CT urography for diagnosis. Here, that's what I was alluding to, and it is strong. Use diagnostic ureteroscopy and biopsy if imaging and cytology are not sufficient for the diagnosis and risk stratification of the tumor. This is the risk stratification is what Dr. Swati was mentioning. MRI and FDG can be considered occasionally when CT is contraindicated. And for me, at least it doesn't mention anything about bone scan. Bone scan, the chance of bony metastasis without a lymph node metastasis in something with small tumor is very small. So that's why bone scan would not be my first investigation tool. Yes. Dr. Kinjal, do you agree with that?
Sir, but I would like to support for bone scan. Sir, I would like to support for bone scan because maybe the sometimes we do see bone metastasis in absence of nodal metastasis. And if we are not doing PET scan, at least a bone scan should be done.
Okay. I would not agree on that. The only reason is that there will always be exceptions to everything. That the reason why the guidelines are made is so that we are right majority of the times. If one patient comes up who had a bone scan, we can't keep on doing bone scans. It is, especially for urothelial carcinoma, it seems to be a more of a stepladder sort of a disease. It will be locally extensive, lymph nodal metastasis, regional metastasis, and then goes to the bone scan, bony metastasis. There will always be some exceptions, but we can't do a bone scan just because one patient did turn up like that. So tumor board, if the patient comes up with a 2.5 centimeter mid-ureteric with periureteric standing, URS shows high-grade non-invasive urothelial carcinoma. Anyone can take it. Would you take the non-invasive as the truth, Dr. Rupesh?
It is less likely as there is hydronephrosis, as you told, mild hydronephrosis, and 2.1 centimeter mass itself is a little bigger mass for the mid-ureter. So I would consider it as a invasion into the ureteral wall.
Okay. So because it's a very small biopsy, the level of invasion can't be assessed. So you would not believe that one. Okay, Dr. Dhruv, do you think this is an ideal case for neoadjuvant chemotherapy?
Since it's a high-grade disease, we may consider neoadjuvant chemotherapy.
I would do the
especially since after surgery.
No. Why would you not advocate neoadjuvant chemotherapy? I thought you would jump at
if it is operable, then if it is operable, then one should go for first surgery and followed by adjuvant chemotherapy. Okay. But there is always a chance of renal function declining after surgery. So adjuvant chemotherapy, it may be possible that we would not be able to complete 4 cycles which are recommended in such high grade, especially muscle invasive urothelial carcinoma. Okay. Since it is possible, this is
from you. Would you like to do neoadjuvant or adjuvant?
I would preferably first go for surgery. So I would preferably go for adjuvant chemotherapy, not neoadjuvant in this setting.
And you're not planning to become a surgeon?
Yeah. No. I would preferably go for adjuvant chemotherapy in this for this case.
Okay. Why you are specifically saying this case?
Since this URS history is showing non-invasive, and it probably is operable, as I can see.
Okay, it is operable.
Yeah. So I think surgery would be the first line option in this. Okay. And followed by adjuvant therapy, depending on what the histopath is showing.
Dr. Swati, would you prefer to just go down the line of radical neoadjuvant, or would you ring again Dr. Dhruv and say, please give him neoadjuvant chemotherapy? Because he doesn't want to give it.
No, surgery in this case, sir, because there is a likelihood that the patient might not require the adjuvant therapy. He is not clear-cut node positive or clear-cut periureteric standing, so we should go ahead with surgery.
Okay, the ultrasound scan showed that there is some edema. The CT scan shows that periureteric edema. That was before you did a ureteroscopy. Post-ureteroscopy, you can say otherwise. Yes. And the lymph nodes are always a bit of a query. That's why we do template lymph node dissection. Okay, we don't do piecemeal lymph node dissection. We do template lymph node dissection. So there is always a probability, especially with an upper tract tumor in the renal pelvis, as well as in the mid-ureter. There are 2 lesions quite big in size. Still, you don't want to do neoadjuvant chemotherapy?
Though there are papers and the literature suggests that neoadjuvant would have a survival benefit in these patients, but since the patient doesn't have the CT, the periureteric edema is not conclusive of the patient having T2, T3 or T4 disease, so I would go ahead with surgery.
Okay. Dr. Kinjal, would you like to give radiotherapy? Nobody likes to give radiotherapy.
So I absolutely agree with Dr. Swati here, that I would not be tempted to go for either chemotherapy or a neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy for this kind of patients.
Okay. I would directly a question. Would you ever consider radiotherapy for
not for this patient? Absolutely not.
Not for this. Would you ever consider
any patient? No, I would not. I would not. Not for a bladder. Nothing beyond bladder. Nothing above bladder.
A patient upper tract urothelial carcinoma which is locally advanced. Who is bleeding? Hematuria?
No. I would prefer doing a surgery for those patients also.
Okay. Radical nephroureterectomy followed by RT? No, you don't want to?
Yeah, I might go for a NU followed by RT if required, but not radiotherapy.
What would be the scenario to give RT?
Yeah, so if there are there is a fast standing, there are extra bureau spread positive or if there are nodes positive, I might give a adjuvant radiotherapy for those patients along with chemotherapy. But otherwise, I would not go for a radiation chemo beforehand.
I'll do this one. Okay. So if you have a patient underwent the radical nephroureterectomy, there is one lymph node out of the 10 lymph nodes. Dr. Swati did an excellent job. All the margins are negative. Would you go for adjuvant chemotherapy or would you go for adjuvant?
Yeah. So that is a very good question.
Just say which one?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We have both the options. In this patient. We can go for an adjuvant.
Better evidence.
Earlier we had an evidence of going for an adjuvant chemoradiation. The recent evidence shows that radiotherapy does not play an important role in that. So you can go for a chemotherapy only adjuvantly as far as the newer evidence is concerned.
Okay. So just to move on to the next slide, neoadjuvant chemotherapy, Dr. Dhruv is absolutely adamant. He doesn't want to give it, though there is good enough evidence. No, I'm just.
Sir, I wanted to add. Yeah. Do you have a CT image of this periureteric stranding? Do you have image of this?
No, I don't have the image of it.
Okay, that will make much difference when we are looking at CT scan. And considering high grade periureteric stranding I may consider this patient for neoadjuvant. I might go for.
Okay. No. The only reason why
I want yes.
The evidence for neoadjuvant is not as good as for the adjuvant one.
Yeah, I agree. Still, this patient might have.
Only when it is not standard by operation, if we think that we are not going to clear it, then you would consider neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Then the only advantage of neoadjuvant is you've got 2 kidney units, so you can give them quite good dose of chemotherapy. You never know how they will end up after the surgery, whether you can give them adjuvant chemotherapy or not. Have I summarized that well enough? So you would go with nephroureterectomy, and I do understand what Dr. Rupesh has said. If there is quite a bit of perinephric stranding, not like an edema, more like an extramural disease, then you would say neoadjuvant chemotherapy would be of use. Okay?
Yeah.
So which one would you like? Let's try to move on a bit quick. Open laparoscopic or robotic? Which one do you prefer? Everything is available.
Laparoscopic.
Laparoscopic.
I don't have a robot. I don't have robot, so I will do with. If everything is available, then I will give option to the patient. How can he spend? No. Because robotic will.
What do you want to do, and why?
Then robotic is my preferred because
extraperitoneal or transperitoneal?
Transperitoneal.
Okay, why not extraperitoneal?
I am not versed with retroperitoneal. I am more
as an open. Let's say that this was a 4 centimeter tumor in the renal pelvis. Renal pelvis is bulging. Okay.
Yeah.
How would you approach it? Laparoscopic or open?
Laparoscopic. Renal pelvic tumor.
Renal pelvic tumor. The pelvis is full of tumor.
Both options. Laparoscopic can be done. Yes. Laparoscopic.
There is always a difference between can be done to what is.
Yes. Laparoscopic. Laparoscopic. I will do laparoscopic.
If you are doing anything open, okay, when would you consider doing an open nephroureterectomy?
Usually we do.
Would you like to do an open nephroureterectomy?
Sir, usually I keep the criteria of mass lesions more than 10 centimeter. But in this case, TCC, whenever I think there can be some spread outside the extra renal spread, when the spread is more likely to be outside the girotas, extra girota spread, then I would like to do an open. Otherwise, more than 10 centimeter size tumors, I usually do.
You are saying that have you seen a more than 10 centimeter urothelial malignancy?
No. But in such case, we used to give chemotherapy first. If it is extra gerota and
after neoadjuvant chemotherapy, you go and do surgery. Would you do
then
open or laparoscopy?
Yeah.
That's what.
Then open. Then open.
Open which way? Extraperitoneal or transperitoneal?
Extraperitoneal through retroperitoneal.
Why extraperitoneal?
Because we do not want to peritoneum. We can spare by doing extraperitoneal.
So why are you not considering the same when you do laparoscopy? That was a question.
But the case are the different, sir.
That wasn't the question. The question was whenever there is a chance that you might rupture the urothelial cavity, whether it's the renal pelvis or the ureter, whenever there is evidence of extramural disease, what tends to I'll show you the guidelines to go with it. There seems to be a systemic spread whenever you go transperitoneal, or laparoscopic or robotic transperitoneal. So in those situations whenever there is not contained within the organ, a tight renal pelvis is a very good indication to do extraperitoneal open nephroureterectomy. That's what the guidelines say. That's what even case series say. There is only one randomized control trial comparing open to laparoscopic, and it says the chance of metastatic disease is higher following laparoscopy. And when they looked at it, it seems to be more for higher grade disease. Okay. Rupesh, lymph node dissection, do you do it? What would be a template? Quick one.
Yes, every time lymph node dissection do.
Okay. You can say standard. Dr. Swati, how would you approach the bladder cuff?
Bladder cuff, the around 1 centimeter bladder cuff has to be dissected along with the ureter.
How do you do it? Laparoscopically or open or robotic? Which way?
Usually either I do robotic or open. Laparoscopic some of the cases only. Otherwise, we have to change the ports and.
Okay. Do you give them intravesical chemotherapy after?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So the template for, I think these are very extensive lymph node. These are for the renal, pelvic, and upper ureter. You're supposed to come for the right side. You're supposed to come up to the para-aortic. It would be better if you can come up to the middle of the aortic. So intra-aortic cable as well as the para-cable and retrocable. Para-cable, retrocable, and intra-aortic cable have to be cleared. For the left one, you come up to the middle of the cava. And when you go for lower, if you see them, you got to, even for the mid-ureteric, this is mid-ureteric, you have to come up to the common iliac. Same. And on the left side, it is much more. You have to clear the internal iliac as well. So these are the templates. They are a lot more extensive than what we think they are. And I'm going to ask a question. Do you think lymph node dissection is therapeutic, Dr. Swati?
More of a prognostic role.
Okay, so prognostic role is mainly with respect to, these are all case series. These are not randomized controlled trial evidence. We think that, yes, it is prognostic. The evidence is very good for prognostic, but we all believe that in some patients, they would be probably therapeutic. And this is what it shows. Cancer-specific survival in large tumors. The complete lymph node dissection does give them some survival. Okay. So post-NU, do you give them post-nephroureterectomy? Do you give them intravesical? I'm going to go to Dhruv. Dhruv doesn't want to give chemotherapy to anyone. Would you like to give in this setting, Dhruv?
Intravesical chemotherapy?
Yes, you don't. But do you advise the urologist to give it?
Yes.
Yeah, you are convinced.
Yes.
If they are planning to refer them to you, say, please give them intravesical chemotherapy.
I will suggest definitely.
Okay. Anything more to add, Rupesh?
Nothing much.
Okay, so you give them as a standard. So at around 8 to 10 days time, you would do a cystogram, and if it is negative, i.e. there is no leakage, you give them one dose of intravesical mitomycin. The evidence for that is from the ODMIT-C trial, and they gave them one dose, and the efficacy was there up to 12 months. In that the chances of, these are the numbers, absolute reduction is 11%, relative reduction is 40%. Dhruv would kill somebody for one dose of intravesical chemotherapy. These are the number needed to treat 9. Do you ever have any of your medical oncology trials showing that good and that low and number needed to treat?
No.
So, and it doesn't tend to cause any harm other than the surgeon forgetting about it. I think when we say cystogram, at that time we might as well just prescribe the mitomycin. Yes. Rarely have I found any side effects from it. Okay. So the histology, Dr. Swati and Dr. Rupesh, both of them did a very good job. It is T3N0. Now would you give them adjuvant chemotherapy, Dr. Dhruv?
Since it is T3 lesion, I would definitely give 4 cycles of cisplatin gemcitabine combination.
Okay. Do you think you have got good enough evidence? Because
yeah, it has shown to
clear. They never went anywhere near the tumor. There is a bit of fat around that. All of that is clear. Still, you want to give chemotherapy?
I think according to the NCCN 2021 guidelines,
no, don't quote me. I'm saying this patient is there in your clinic. Would you give them chemotherapy?
Yeah, definitely. Any patient who has pathological T2 and or T2 above lesions or N plus lesion, I would definitely consider adjuvant chemotherapy.
Okay, Dr. Kinjal, you would say this is not a systemic disease. So why are we giving them systemic drug? This is a local disease. Margins are clear, lymph nodes are clear. Why don't we give them local RT?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with you on this. For a T3N0, I would prefer giving a adjuvant chemoradiation rather than giving a adjuvant chemotherapy. So such patient would benefit more from the adjuvant chemoradiation concurrently than only adjuvant chemotherapy for a T3N0.
Okay, Dr. Dhruv, do you disagree with that?
Since you had already said it is a high grade lesion, T3 lesion, adjuvant chemotherapy has a definite role. Radiation, I am a little bit doubtful.
Okay, so you are not happy with Dr. Kinjal to suggest radiotherapy to be added on?
Yeah, I would prefer only chemotherapy.
Okay,
so
Dr.
can I ask a question? Can I ask a question?
I'll come to you. Dr. Rupesh is the overall in charge of the management. Rupesh, would you like to patient to have radiotherapy, or you think the evidence is not good enough?
I will not send patient to radiation oncologist.
Okay.
I will
Dr.
send to
Kinjal, please counteract.
Yeah, so why would you need a chemotherapy for a T3N0 if the disease has not gone out, if it has not gone to nodes? Why would you give chemotherapy? What is the purpose of giving chemotherapy?
Yeah, this is the evidence for it. You don't have an
Micrometastasis.
RCT. There is a phase 3 open label RCT for adjuvant chemotherapy. It was to find this many 260 patients with this sort of numbers is amazing. I'm grateful, or I know majority of the people in this trial. I used to work with Alison Bartle. Mark Johnson is a very good friend. So this one was a very difficult patient cohort. You can pick and choose so many holes in the trial, but still it is a good trial. Dr. Dhruv, do you want to say this is my evidence for giving adjuvant chemotherapy?
Yes, definitely.
Now, Dr. Kinjal, do you want to say anything more?
So what about a local failure? What about a local failure?
A metastasis-free survival, because
so chemo, I agree with the chemotherapy. What about the local failure for a T3 lesion?
If it has managed to prevent metastasis-free, do you think it won't help even the local free? Because
I would disagree. So I would disagree with that, because for a local control you require a radiotherapy, because when you do a surgery, the blood supply is reciprocated for that particular area. So chemotherapy acting for a local area, I absolutely disagree with only chemo taking care of the local recurrences.
Okay. Dr. Dhruv, do you want to comment on the hazard ratio of 0.48 for almost both of them? Is that very good, or for urologists like me, do you think that's acceptable hazard ratio for me to give the patient?
I think is it very good.
Okay. So for all the patients who have got more than T2, NEN, you would like to give them as adjuvant chemotherapy?
Yes.
Okay. So if there was one take-home message from it, please do consider adjuvant chemotherapy for all high-grade, more than T2, NEN, urothelial carcinomas. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And RT, there is some evidence. We have used it, but we have used it anecdotally. We do not have level 3 evidence. Okay. Kinjal, do you agree in that? We can use them, but not on all.
Yeah. So now we need to think about the bladder also. Now we can go to the bladder also for that. The same thing for anything beyond T2N0. What about the role of radiotherapy for a T2N0 bladder? And now extrapolate from there. You can extrapolate from there.
Yes, we will in the next one. Yes. Yeah. So here, if you see about it, the nephroureterectomy with high risk should be considered. That's strong. Perform open RNU in non-organ confined urothelial. That's what I was trying to allude to, Rupesh. Yes. Whenever you think that there may be a tumor, it is safer. For whatever reason, that's how we have always developed that open nephroureterectomy is extraperitoneal, whereas both laparoscopic and robotic, all of us do transperitoneal. And we know we are going across an anatomical barrier to do a high-risk surgery. That's what I was alluding to. Remove the bladder cuff. Dr. Swati always does it very well. Perform template-based lymph node dissection. Offer post-operative system. What is this about platinum-based chemotherapy? Dr. Dhruv, they have emphasized on platinum-based chemotherapy for muscle-invasive upper tract urothelial carcinoma. You should always aim for a platinum-based.
Yeah, preferably cisplatin rather than carboplatin. Cisplatin, gemcitabine combination or dose-dense MVAC combination. Any platinum-based combination therapy has been shown to have a better results as compared to other combination.
Super. And then the last one was post-operative bladder installation of chemotherapy. Strong. Okay, Dr. Ashish has come on board. Do you want me to stop, sir?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
you can sum up.
I need to apologize to Dr. Kinjal then. Sorry, you can't have your fight back to say that why don't we extrapolate the bladder cancer.
No problems. But at the same time, I want to make a point. If a T3N0 comes to me, I am pretty sure Dr. Ashish will send the patient to me for radiotherapy for sure at our place.
Okay. Dr. Ashish is a very I just want an answer in yes and no, sir. Do you, I'm going to make a statement, just give yes. All T3N0 upper urinary tract cancers who are margin negative and good enough lymph node dissection, do you offer them RT or not? Yes or no?
Chemotherapy plus minus RT, not in all cases. Majority of the cases only chemotherapy.
On majority of the cases, only chemotherapy. There would be some exceptions wherein we might use RT. Am I right in saying that?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Rupesh, Dr. Swati, Dr. Kinjal. I know you have been drafted in at the last minute. So
thank you. No problems.
Yeah,
no problems. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
I think you should start using a bit more chemotherapy than what you are using. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for such a nice moderation, and
thank you
for their active participation. So with the interest of time, I think we need to move our second panel. So I request Dr. Mansi to take on lead. And you have a panelist, Dr. Akash, Dr. Kalpesh, Dr. Nitin, and Dr. Mudassir Ahmed. Over to you, Dr. Mansi. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the kind introduction. So we do not have Dr. Priyanka and...
there is some family issue, Dr. Rahul. Because of the COVID scenario, these 2-3 doctors are not on the board.
Okay. So
Akash, Dr. Kalpesh, Dr. Nitin, and Dr. Mudassir.
Okay. So I think the questions for Dr. Rahul and Dr. Priyanka will be shared between the medical oncologists. I'll just tell as we go. Sir, Dr. Ashish has made it so simple for me to complete this on time, and even Dr. Bharat. So I'm just going to discuss it in a very casual way, just what we would do in practice, since we already know the evidence very well. And I'm happy to see that there is just one person in the urology side and we are a gang here. But I would be very happy if this is the scenario even in urology conferences for metastatic RCC discussions. So, okay, this is actually case one. A 68-year-old female presented January 2019 with a history of severe headache for past 6 months. And on inquiry, we got to know that she had a history of radical nephrectomy done in 2011. Clear cell RCC was the diagnosis. And after that, she had defaulted treatment. And in April 2015, she had come for just a regular follow-up with some cough, and her CT chest showed some lung nodules. And after which she was again started on pazopanib, but she took it on and off for 4 months and then defaulted. Somebody had done a PET scan in 2018, which was normal. But now in 2019, she had this diffuse swelling over the parieto-occipital region, and she had severe headache. So how would you approach this patient, Dr. Akash? Dr. Akash, can you hear me?
Yes. So I missed your previous slide. Sorry, madam.
Okay. I'll ask Dr. Kalpesh then. What would your next investigation be?
MRI of brain will be the first investigation of choice.
Okay, what would you suspect in such a patient? Are you expecting something, or just because of the headache?
No, it was a palpable lesion over this area. It may be a scalp metastasis bony lesion that may be growing there.
Okay, so would you offer just MRI or would you also offer PET scan?
A PET scan can be offered, but first I would like to see MRI brain.
Okay, so MRI brain was done, and this was the image. There was this huge vascular lesion in the extra-axial axial intradiploic area, and it was quite big, and it was also FDG avid. I'll make it simple for you. We did a PET scan, but we could only see this lesion, and there was some uptake in the thyroid gland. So we went ahead and we also did an FNAC of the thyroid gland, and it came as clear cell cancer. And there was this lesion. There was nothing else in the PET scan. I don't have that image, unfortunately. So, Dr. Akash, what would you do next? Would you want to biopsy the brain lesion?
No, madam. Biopsy is not required. That we would consider as metastatic only.
So would you consider it metastatic because we have the thyroid FNAC or even otherwise?
No, because thyroid FNAC.
If we didn't have a thyroid FNAC, what would you have done?
Then we will do FNAC, madam, or biopsy.
Okay. And in case there was no thyroid uptake, there was just this lesion, would you do an FNAC or something else?
No, madam. Clear cell, it might happen. There is no uptake.
Okay. Okay. Point taken. So yeah, we did the PET scan, and then there was just this and the thyroid uptake, but there was no other lesion seen on the CT part as well. So we don't have a radiation oncologist or a neurosurgeon here. Dr. Mudassir, what would you plan next for this patient?
I think you answered me. I would like my neurosurgeon friend to tell me whether it is completely resectable without significant damage to the brain. From the pictures, it looks like that it is outside the, probably outside the brain. It may be in the meninges or in the, inner chamber of the skull. I would like my neurosurgeon's advice.
Yes. So I did take the neurosurgeon's advice. They were scared. They said it looks very vascular, and they anyways generally panic when you tell cancer. So they think, no, it's stage 4 cancer. We are not touching it. You do whatever you want to do. So then what would you do next?
Then I would ask my radiation oncologist whether they would like to. Is the patient symptomatic for this? One is that patient who had headache. Other than that?
Swelling and headache, very severe headache. That was the symptom which brought her to us.
Okay, so I would still insist for surgery. So that is one. But other than that, the second choice would be to address this with maybe the immediate use of steroids plus maybe I will ask my radiation oncologist if he can do something. Because the patient has already been exposed to pazopanib, I think, which I suppose which was given in probably for some time in 2015.
Yeah, that was just for 4 months, and she was not very compliant, and she left it on her own.
So she's otherwise a favorable risk, a metastatic disease. I would still suggest that we should address the main site of the disease right now, which is the probably the skull or the inner tube of the skull, and the thyroid separately, or we can address it with surgery or with radiotherapy, and followed by the first line treatment you have to choose.
Okay. So would you advise, if it was operable, would you advise a thyroidectomy plus metastatectomy of this lesion, or would you just do one?
I would at least firstly go for, because patient is symptomatic for this, so I would definitely go for this, the excision of this brain lesion, and the other lesion, thyroid. Probably yes, we can go for, because metastasectomy has been, because this patient has been diagnosed initially in 2011, so she has had a fairly long progression-free time. I think she might actually, if we do total metastasectomy, she might as well have no metastasis in some time. We may actually delay the system.
Yes, so I totally agree with you. If I had my way and I had my control over the surgeons in our hospital, I would have got this operated and the thyroid addressed, but that didn't happen. So we did SBRT for this patient, and the thyroid was left alone. So this was the lesion before, and this was 3 months after the SBRT. There are multiple scans after that, including MRI. It has almost resolved, and the thyroid was left alone. So in case thyroid was removed, what would you do as systemic therapy, Dr. Kalpesh? And what if the thyroid was left behind? Is there any difference that in the systemic therapy?
I think it doesn't make much difference. We have to monitor thyroid functions while using this TKI. And if a patient is affording it, then we can go for this always nivolumab plus ipilimumab combination or like treatment.
But would you want to use it right away? There are just 2 metastatic sites. It's oligometastatic. One site has been handled. It's just thyroid. Thyroid function is normal. What would you want to do?
We'll prefer this TKI first, sunitinib or pazopanib.
Yeah, so she had discontinued pazopanib earlier, 4 months ago. I mean, for just 4 months she took and she discontinued because she had toxicity. So then would you want to start sunitinib, or would you want to re-challenge with pazopanib?
No, sunitinib.
You would start sunitinib?
Yes.
Dr. Mudassir, any difference of opinion in this? Dr. Mudassir? Dr. Akash?
Madam, this
was muted. Sorry. So this patient, you have given 2 scenarios, that we address the thyroid or there is no thyroid in the way. So if we have addressed the primary one of the lesions, that is the brain lesion, and there is no other lesion in the body, I very well just observe the patient.
Right.
But if there is another site of metastasis which we have proven with an FNAC, I would like to address then the patient needs some type of therapy. Can you just tell me what is the age of the patient? I just forgot.
68.
Okay, so 68 years of age. Now we have to choose the first line in a favorable, prognosis patient. Though there are 2 options available. One is immuno-oncology drug combination or immuno-oncology drug plus axitinib, or the third option is the TKI alone. IO may not be probably here, because they did not have good response rate. But IO had the maximum CR rate. So if the patient was a younger patient, I would prefer IO combination, and will reserve the TKI combination or TKI based combination for the later line. But if the patient is having and the patient is not having any lot of tumor, the patient is not having a lot of burden of disease, because the lesion which was actually causing symptoms has been addressed with SBRT. So then probably IO may be a good option for this patient.
Okay, so because this was in 2019, I didn't have the IO option. So we gave her pazopanib. From 400 mg, she also tolerated 600 mg, and till date, she is on it and her scans are clear. She's totally asymptomatic. So this brings us, to the criteria of active surveillance or TKI alone and the risk stratification. So which risk stratification do you use, Dr. Akash?
I use IMDC, but both can be used, almost equal, except 2 factors are different. I use IMDC. Yeah,
because MSK-CC was designed at the time of the previous agents, pre-TKI era, and IMDC is valid even in the current immuno-oncology trials which they are using. So I would also go for IMDC. I think we should get done with MSK-CC from now on. And we've already discussed that if we leave behind something, we need to give some form of systemic treatment. There is a debate whether when you remove all the metastatic disease sites, do you need to give systemic treatment? It's a debatable area, but the guidelines say that there is no need of any systemic treatment because there is hardly any burden of disease, and you can, give some time for active surveillance. So we've already answered. We go for risk stratification, and this is the risk stratification which Dr. Ashish has already mentioned, and this is what we should be using. This patient was in favorable risk almost, she had no risk factors, and just TKI alone was given for her. Even observation could have been one of the options for her. So for observation, we do have some data, but we need to very, very selectively, very, very precisely select the patients. There is a study which surprisingly also showed that active surveillance could be better for some patients. But again, we really need to select the patients correctly. In today's era, with so much of information, stage 4 disease, patients would not be very happy with active surveillance. And we don't have really strong data to just advise active surveillance. So we kind of at least give something, if not nothing, to these patients. But there is a debate between active surveillance and just single TKI. So in very, very selective patients.
So few patients, I would like to say few patients, I keep patient under observation. Is like if upfront only patient present with the renal mass and very few subcentimetric but obvious metastatic lesions. So we do nephrectomy and lung lesions I keep under observation, and sometimes it pass on for 1-2 years and then it start to progress and then we start treatment. And patient present like this unusual presentation, but after 4-5 years, if very small 1 or 2 lung lesions, if they appear, at that time also either we can go for the surgery, and sometimes we keep patient under observation also. So patient pass at least 1 to 3 years without, means it's treatment free.
Yeah, that's a strategy, and that's the advantages. But exactly, we need to really select the patients very carefully. And we didn't have a lot of benefit in favorable risk patients for the combination. It's not really dramatic. So I would say, given our patients and our financial constraints, I would still go for TKI alone in favorable risk patients. Of course, if you want a better ORR, we would go for the combination, as Dr. Bharat rightly mentioned. Moving on, case 2. So this is a patient I have just seen last week. She's a 63-year-old lady. She has hypertension, SLE, probably mixed connective tissue disorder, recurrent UTI, and has CKD since 1997. Currently off all medications. Doing well, PS0. On workup for flank pain, she was found to have a retroperitoneal mass. The CT scan suggested that it was a mass coming out from the gastric wall, and there was some lung mets. But the endoscopy just showed hiatus hernia. There was no lesion on the endoscopy. Biopsy was done elsewhere. They had mentioned low-grade epithelial neoplasm. So what would you want to do there next, Dr. Kalpesh?
There is large mass. Can you go back to the first slide?
Yes. There was a CT scan and a biopsy which showed low-grade epithelial neoplasm.
I think immunohistochemistry should be advised to determine what exactly it is.
Okay. So would you also do a PET scan?
Yes, PET scan should be done. Yeah.
Yes. So because it was low grade, we actually did the review of the biopsy first for IHC, but in the meanwhile, a PET scan was done. And even in the PET scan, there was a small lesion in the thoracic esophagus, but there was a large extrarenal renal mass from the right kidney. It was almost 17 centimeters by 18 centimeters. There was some lymph nodes, and there was a very small lung nodule. The biopsy IHC was reviewed and it was suggestive of papillary renal cell carcinoma. Okay, so we have a metastatic RCC, IMDC high risk, but she has bulky disease with good performance status, minimal extrarenal disease. What would you do next, Dr. Nitin?
Hello, is it the clear cell one? Is it the clear cell, right? The pathology?
Yes, clear.
Yes.
Clear cell, then the answer is very obvious, ma'am. Then I would offer the patient a cytoreductive nephrectomy.
Okay.
Provided okay, you have mentioned the performance, it is also good. And since considering that this the majority of the volume of the disease is in the kidney, and we are likely to remove the majority part of the disease by doing the nephrectomy, yes, I would like to offer cytoreductive nephrectomy for this patient.
Dr. Nitin, the creatinine is 2.9 and the left kidney is shrunken.
Okay.
And this is the right kidney mass. What would you do?
Ma'am, now since the kidney, the problem is the kidney function is very less, then we'll have to discuss this like multidisciplinary thing. And considering that we'll have to see the functional kidney this is the only functional kidney. And probably if we remove that, whatever, but I don't think so it will be functioning a lot because it's almost replaced by the mass. So yes. We'll discuss all the pros and cons. And if considering the volume of the disease, I still think it's better because we can then offer her a choice of systemic therapy in that case at present.
Okay. So we did offer her that, but I mean, it was just a multidisciplinary consultation with the urologist, but they said that there was a very high risk of dialysis post-operatively. So would you still want to counsel her for surgery, Dr. Nitin, or would you send them back to the medical oncologist?
Ma'am, with good, like the drugs which we have nowadays, the molecular drugs which we have, I would give at least a chance for that molecular therapy for this patient before contemplating the surgical option.
Okay, thank you so much. I wish you worked in my workplace. So, but no, our surgeons wanted to operate her, but right now there is a debate going on. But how do you as a urologist interpret the Carmina trial?
So Carmina trial, although it is always projected as the silver lining for using chemotherapy in most of the patients for metastatic RCC, but it has its own problems. First of all, if I need to highlight, it is a non-inferiority trial. So when not a superiority trial, it is a non-inferiority trial. Then secondly, the patient selection in this trial, that was a big problem because majority of the patients in this were poor risk patients. Thirdly, if you see this trial, go into details of this trial, there is a problem that because the patients who were shown in the sunitinib arm also, actually almost close to 20% of the patients, they actually went for surgery at some point of time, either due to some acute complications or maybe because they had a good response to chemotherapy. So which makes the interpretation of results a bit of difficulty. Thirdly, the selection criteria, the risk stratification criteria which they used was the MSKCC criteria, which is not applicable for in the present setting, especially when we are using all this newer molecules compared to this older times. And the Carmina trial, if you look at the overall survival also, then it is actually not showing that good survival compared to any other trials for the metastatic patients overall. So these were the basic problems with the Carmina trial. So
okay,
I would still not say that cytoreductive nephrectomy does not have a role. It basically emphasizes that we need to be more careful in patient selection when we take them for cytoreductive nephrectomy.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nitin. I'm happy that you've interpreted the trial well. But one thing, we do not use chemotherapy in RCC. We use immunotherapy.
I meant targeted therapies.
Yes. Because patients would bank a lot on you to, suggest the systemic treatment as well. Yes. So, yeah. So, Dr. Mudassar, any other way of, interpreting the data according to you from a medical oncologist side?
See, for me, the nephrectomy should be done if majority, maybe more than 90% of the disease is resectable at the time of resection. And if the patient is not having a poor risk or intermediate risk disease. In that case, I would ask a surgeon to go for surgery. In this patient, it was written in the history that patient has had SLE also.
Correct.
So I think we will have a problem in using immuno-oncology drugs in this patient.
That's the tricky part.
So our armamentarium of drugs are very limited in this patient.
Okay. So would you rather put
the patient? Yeah, go on.
Would you rather put her on dialysis post-operatively or take the risk with systemic treatment? And if systemic treatment, then which one?
So it is the patient's choice. We would see if the patient does not go for surgery, she straight away goes for systemic treatment. There is no other alternative. There is no observation in this case. So and if the patient has some good response with TKI, which is kind of not that we cannot have such a response that it will just vanish this whole tumor. It looks like a very big tumor.
Correct.
So patient has to take a calculated risk. Yeah.
Dr. Kalpesh, out of these combinations, which combination would you offer? Dr. Mudassir has told that we have to be careful with the combination, but still, which side would you, rather be wrong on? I mean, instead of going with Ipi-Nivo, is there anything else which you would prefer for this patient?
This Pembro plus Lenvatinib right now may be preferred for the same. Okay. So I have no strong data or something for the same.
Yeah, so I mean, instead of 2 IO combinations in a patient who has a history of autoimmune diseases, we would rather go for a IO with TKI combination. Okay. Now, we do not know which combination is better. Being very practical, we would want to know how do you select the combination based on the finances? Like even if the patient is affording, there is a huge difference between all the 4 options. So how do you go about that? Dr. Akash.
So, madam, now is all the combinations have shown OS benefit, and few changes are there with CR rates. And response rates, some differences are there. So now further 2 years, 3 years, I think we will be discussing that how we will sequence all these things. So few points are that if we see for the more CR rates, then right now IO combination is the good, and Pembro-Lenva has shown some good more than 10% benefit. But if we use IO first, then we will have second line option available of TKI, and third line option if we have used Sunitinib second line, then Lenva plus Everolimus we can use. Because if we use Pembro plus Lenva first only, then second, third line options will be reduced. Or we don't
Dr.
have
Mudassir, any you have any comment on this? Do you agree with this?
So in this patient, I will be hesitant to use immuno-oncology drugs at all. Is there any kind of can we use a combination with in patients who have a history of autoimmune diseases?
So yeah, if you have autoimmune disease, there is I'll come to that. So this is how we would generally choose. If we have somebody who has an autoimmune disease, then we would not consider Nivo-Ipi. If there is a chance, we can slowly try to use IO-TKI combination, because Ipi is the major culprit when there is autoimmune disease, and the reactions to Ipi are quite difficult to manage. So this is a very good chart, which I would say it is a take-home message for everybody. And sir, Ashish sir, do we have more time?
Yeah, we can wind up in the next 5 minutes.
Okay.
So Dr. Mansi, I just want to make one point in this. When I have to see if we have to use an IO combination or IO drug, and if there is no other contraindication for IO, and if the patient's disease load is less and the patient is a bit younger, I would suggest I would go for an IO combination, because this combination, and the patient has a long life, long life to have still. And those patients I would prefer to use IO combination, because IO combination in Checkmate 214 had the highest CR rate till now. That is close to around 11%. So I would like to give that benefit if the patient is younger, has less, bulky disease because the response rate was not that good. But if the patient has any of these factors, for example, patient that has bulky disease or patient is a bit elderly, or I mean, not a very long life ahead, then I would go for the for a combination IO plus TKI combination. Axitinib plus pembrolizumab is one of the combination which is right now recommended, and it is recommended by ESMO as well as NCCN. And the other combination which will probably be soon added to the ESMO guidelines is the cabozantinib pembrolizumab. So that is also one of the combinations which can be used.
So Dr. Akash,
nivolumab, sorry.
Yes, cabozantinib. So Dr. Akash, how is your experience with axitinib?
No, madam. Means second line, few patients we have used, but it's not good experience with second line axitinib post sunitinib patients. Otherwise, as a first line, yet we have not used.
Dr. Kalpesh, any experience with axitinib?
No, sorry, madam, I have not used it.
Dr. Mudassir?
I have used axitinib plus pembrolizumab in 2 patients, and I have used axitinib as a second line agent as well. More or less, they're okay. So I don't think so. The hypertension, I usually for the first few months, I tell them to chart the hypertension, the blood pressure, and other than that, they are settling with the just minor adjustment of the doses. And the patient
do you start at 5 mg or do you start at the full dose?
I start at 5 mg usually and then go up.
Okay, so I actually lost a patient on pembrolizumab and axitinib a couple of months ago, and it was quite. It was not expected, and it was probably because of a hypertensive bleed. But I don't know because the patient was in Mysore. So I have a personal bias against axitinib. I'm very happy with lenvatinib. Though lenvatinib, I'm not sure what doses we should start. I start at 8 mg. Then go to 12 and then increase if required. Any other, experiences with lenvatinib in combination? Ashish sir, you could also guide us.
I just want to make
I have not used lenvatinib in combination, but the other combination I have used. But so because the data is, somebody was saying that if you do not check the internet before the next OPD, the guidelines might have changed. You may actually get a wrong treatment.
Yes, so I'll just come to the guideline then, so that we at least take this message home. So while we watch this, Ashish sir, your comments, please.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment here because what you're discussing for axitinib, I think some of the patients actually they're badly tolerate axitinib. That's right. And I think in my practice, what I does at combination of IO, especially pembrolizumab with axitinib, I start with the 5 mg. And then probably it will go slowly because, the IO combination, sometimes a patient having tolerance issues and most of the patient, they are elderly. But in the second line, I usually start with the 7.5, then probably graduating of 10. And that is usually my doses because even the guidelines, you can go ahead with the 7.5 BD also, but I think 10 mg is my cutoff.
And so lenvatinib, any experience?
So lenvatinib is okay. I think with the second line, I think I've used in the second line as of now because this clear trial data is recently been published. So lenva and everolimus is absolutely fine. Lenva is a no-issue. I think everolimus dose is only OD 5 mg. So that is something which is helpful in the tolerance of this combination.
But would you look forward to lenva pembro combination now after the clear data?
Yes, absolutely. That is encouraging, but I think you need to yet to see the OS. So right now, I think for good risk, it is definitely is the preferred modality of treatment. But in intermediate and poor risk, we have all 3 options. So I think if the patient is not very much symptomatic, I think IO combination should be the way I usually consider.
Right. I have to make one comment.
Sir, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir, Bharat, sir.
I have a question for you. I have a same question which you asked Dr. Bharat, sir.
Look,
he's there.
Second,
may ask you the same
if I tell you, actually, I am not comfortable whether the patient with the autoimmune disease, CKD, with so many comorbidity, whether he will really tolerate a combination of IO TKI. that is a very difficult. The performance status of that patient with day one also, you have so many things. CKD, the data with Cabo, you don't have a data in CKD of Cabo. Even with sunitinib also, the case series, you have to dialyze and give it. So I'm really bit skeptical in giving a 2 drug in a patient who is already having a CKD and an active autoimmune disease. So it will be a difficult thing for first thing to what Mudassar said, whether he will be really fit enough to tolerate any treatment. Definitely. For me, rather than, you can see, you have said CKD, rather than by default, I think so the patient will be fit only for a single agent TKI, although that may work or not, because already you have mixed connective tissue disorder with SLE. So probably a thing which is, and plus he has a CKD also. So probably the main thing, understand, we need a good performance status. The ideal thing, whenever we discuss why in the first line, is patient should be fit enough also. With so many comorbidity, and I really have a doubt whether active autoimmune with a CKD, probably she may not. For me, fitness will be a big issue. Probably a single agent TKI, because in this patient, other option may not be feasible because of comorbidity. For me, that is not. The best drug is PEM-LEN. That has the best data now. 71% response rate, 90% disease control rate. Mudassar was telling 11% CR. It has a 16% CR. So the best CR rate, you can call it, it has the best. But again, it has the toxicity the most. 71% grade 3 toxicity. In the drug discontinuation rate of 25%. If you see the LEN arm, 18% with a Pembro arm, and combine also more than 10%. So probably whenever we choose a patient for anything, the first thing which will be whether he is really fit enough for anything. And that is my thing.
Sir, this patient is actually PS0. If you see her, she is absolutely fine. Her SLE and mixed connective tissue disease is a history. I'm trying to work it up whether it is active or not. She's not on any medications for that as of now. And I was actually contesting between I have even just today I have spoken to them again. Would you consider single agent IO or single agent TKI?
If you ask me, single agent IO will be better in a CKD because you don't have a metabolism through kidney of IO. If you treat cabozantinib, there is data to suggest that severe renal we don't give. The data is for mild to moderate renal failure. So I don't think of all those. Even in sunitinib, the case series, you have to dialyze probably, and then you have it. So for me, a patient of CKD, I may not be keen for giving a double agent, because only thing is whether she will really tolerate it or not will be a big issue for me with other comorbidity. But I agree with all the discussion. Second thing about axitinib. Look, axitinib, maybe everybody, if you see the data also, the ACCESS study, if they have already taken a first line TKI, and then if you give axitinib in the second line, the response rate is only 4%. Those patients had already taken interferon sort of drug. If you have already taken a TKI in the first line, and again you give a axitinib, probably axitinib may not be such a good option. The best drug, if you give a TKI as a single agent in the second line, is cabozantinib, with an added MET and an AXL inhibitor. Right. And lenvatinib also, whenever we give, probably the data and every literature is with mTOR inhibitor. So single agent lenvatinib also may not be the right approach, either in the first line or second line. And ACCESS may, for all patients, if you see the registration study, we start with 5 mg per kg. Day 15, if the patient has not developed hypertension, we increase it to 7 mg per kg. And still, if the patient has not developed the hypertension, you may increase to 10 mg. The criteria is the patient has to develop hypertension, because the surrogate marker for giving axitinib is the patient should develop hypertension. So basically, it has to be that wedge inhibition. Then if the patient is not tolerating, then you can come down to 3 mg. So hypertension is needed for increasing or reducing the dose, whatever we do.
Right.
Sir, when you use axitinib along with an immuno-oncology drug, when do you change? After how many weeks?
Sir, the thing is, if there is a progression, we need to change both the drugs. If there is a side effect, then we need to stop axitinib and continue with your immuno-oncology drug, the guidelines say. Now, if you see
I'm actually asking about the hypertension. When you watch for hypertension, when would you change? You would kind of...
I will not change it, sir. The thing is, if there is no hypertension, I'll increase the dose. If there is uncontrolled hypertension, now uncontrolled hypertension is defined as hypertension after giving 3 antihypertensive drugs. So even if I give 3 antihypertensive drugs and the patient continues to have hypertension, then probably I'll reduce the dose to 3 mg, because if it is uncontrolled, I'm telling you. But I may not stop it right from the word go. If in 3 mg also, probably not because of hypertension, but maybe because of rash, fatigue, or other things, I may stop it. But probably hypertension may not. In fact, hypertension is a good thing, good surrogate sign whenever you are giving exercise.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely. Agree.
So this is a very interesting chart. If we could remember all of this, I cannot. I have to go back and refer to this every time I have a patient. But this is how complicated it is. But we do have an option up to 5 lines, 6 lines, this, irrespective of what combination you start with. So the debate or the thought that if you start with one and you may not have an option later does not hold good. There are multiple options, and of course it's all, it's like playing marbles. So yes, we can, I think, close with this. And this is a short summary of how to use the next agent. And yeah, my final remark, which I use for all immuno-oncology debates is immunotherapy, the knight in shining armor for all cancers? Maybe, but for renal cancer, for the first time, I'm putting a yes in this slide. So yeah, let's close on this. Thank you, Ashish sir. Your last comments, please.
Yeah, thanks for such a good moderation. I think I really enjoyed. And, all the panelists, Dr. Mudassar, Dr. Akash, Dr. Kalpesh, and Dr. for the participation. And of course, Dr. Bharat has rightly mentioned all the options and nicely summarized, especially the first line treatment options. So thanks to everyone. And I hope everybody's enjoyed for this session of renal and bladder cancer. I hope we'll continue such kind of discussion in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ashish.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.